My older sister never really liked me growing up. She treated me with absolute coldness. She would snatch my toys and tear up my homework. However, after a building collapsed, my sister suddenly became a completely different person. Ava was 5 years older than me. When my mother gave birth to me, there was almost a fatal complication, which scared Ava into wailing. She threw a massive tantrum, screaming that she didn't want this bad little sister and demanding that they stuff me right back inside, leaving the whole family caught between tears and laughter. So even though both my mother and I made it through safely, Ava couldn't stand the sight of me from the moment I was born. Ava and I had polar opposite personalities. I loved Barbie dolls, while she loved superhero action figures. I loved singing and dancing, whereas she was obsessed with all kinds of combat sports. By the time I won a competition in ballet, she was already a black belt in taekwondo. Naturally, I could never beat her in a fight growing up. Our parents never gave Ava the typical lecture about letting me win because I was the younger sister. Whenever I ran crying to our parents to tattle after taking a beating, they would just gloat at my misfortune and tell me that I brought it upon myself for provoking her, explicitly stating they wouldn't help me. My so-called beginner's protection period at home was universally considered over by the entire family the moment I learned how to speak and walk. Completely oblivious to this reality, I repeatedly went out of my way to provoke Ava. After taking countless beatings, I finally achieved a profound realization. In our household, brute force dictated the rules. Ava was the supreme authority. Being someone who knew when to bow down, I once considered becoming a loyal lackey to this supreme authority, personally serving her tea, pouring her water, and massaging her shoulders and back. Whenever I did this, Ava would just stare at me with high alert, saying she always felt like I was plotting some kind of mischief. This was absolute slander against me. However, even the supreme authority had someone she feared, and that was our grandma. This wasn't just because grandma had raised her since she was a baby, but also because grandma had a habit of blaming my mistakes on Ava. As far as I can remember, the things grandma said to her most frequently were scoldings about making me cry again, questioning why she couldn't be the mature one when I was being unreasonable, and constantly reminding her of her responsibility as the older sister. What was I doing at 7 or 8 years old during these moments? I was likely hiding right behind grandma, eagerly chiming in to agree that older sisters were absolutely supposed to take care of their younger sisters. My absolute fearlessness stemmed entirely from the fact that Ava would never dare lay a hand on me in front of grandma. Ava would occasionally get frustrated and try to argue back, but no matter how much she debated, grandma always shut her down with the exact same lines. Knowing that Ava felt wronged whenever grandma was around, our parents would always comfort her when we got back home, telling her not to take those words to heart. They would tell her that it was perfectly fine for older sisters to be unreasonable sometimes, and then turn around to warn me that sisters were supposed to take care of each other, threatening me with a beating if I ever repeated the things I said. The amount of swagger I had at grandma's house was directly proportional to how miserable I was in our own home. Our parents' scoldings were one thing, but Ava delivered actual physical beatings. Because of this harsh reality, I eventually stopped treating grandma as a shield for my tyranny. From then on, whenever I made a mistake, I immediately tucked my tail between my legs, confessed, and apologized as quickly as possible. Ava was a person of very few words. Whenever we were in the wrong, the speed at which I offered my apologies was perfectly matched by how tightly she kept her mouth shut. During a third-grade writing class, we were assigned an essay about our family members. I pondered it for a long time and ultimately decided to write a piece titled My Older Sister. That essay utilized every single piece of flowery vocabulary my elementary school brain could muster to describe Ava. In short, the entire thing was nothing but endless flattery. Yet when I proudly took those 2 pages of homework to show off to her, she snatched them and ripped them to shreds right in front of my face. She told me the writing was terrible and ordered me to rewrite it. One can easily imagine the immense psychological damage this inflicted upon my fragile, youthful heart. Our parents would occasionally ask her to tutor me, but tearing up someone's essay was definitely crossing a line. I ran to my mother, crying and sobbing as I tattled that Ava had ripped up my essay. My mother just patted my head and concluded that my writing must have been poor, casually suggesting that I have Ava guide me through writing it again. I argued back, insisting that I hadn't written poorly at all, that it was actually a great essay, and that she had ripped it up on purpose. My mother was busy at the time and didn't have the patience to coddle me, so she simply called out to Ava, asking her to please take me back and help me rewrite it. Consequently, Ava dragged me back into her room and effectively shut me up by shoving a massive rainbow lollipop into my mouth. She never actually apologized to me, she always resorted to methods like this to make me quiet down. Annoyingly enough, I fell for this tactic every single time. The rewritten essay kept the title My Older Sister. She claimed the previous draft was far too superficial, explaining that when praising someone, one should focus on their inner qualities rather than just surface traits. Sometime later, those 2 pages mysteriously vanished into thin air. I just assumed I had carelessly misplaced them, so I wrote out another copy and handed it in. I held a certain level of awe and fear toward Ava. She was ruthless but spoke very little, her grades were incredibly top-notch, and she was exceptionally outstanding overall. Although I hated to admit it, I genuinely believed she was an absolute genius. Her personality was just a bit too cold, especially toward me, as she always treated me with an icy demeanor. Because of this, the two of us were never particularly close or affectionate on a day-to-day basis. In my memories, Ava and I rarely had moments of peaceful coexistence. Our conversations almost always ended abruptly because we simply couldn't see eye to eye. The most intense argument we ever had during our childhood happened on my 12th birthday. Ava was in her final 2 years of high school at the time, burdened with a heavy workload, yet she still made the trip back home specifically to celebrate my birthday. My mother had picked out a beautiful cake decorated with a large pink bow for me. A lot of friends came over to our house, and I received a massive pile of gifts, including one from the younger boy who lived next door. It was an incredibly adorable little bear plushie. The boy mentioned that his father, Mr. Dalton, had specifically brought it back from a business trip, and upon hearing it was my birthday, asked him to give it to me. When Ava arrived, I couldn't wait to grab the little bear and ask her if she thought it was cute. She merely cast a sideways glance at it and gave a dismissive, perfunctory nod. Late that night, after all the guests had left, I carried the little bear into Ava's room. She was in the middle of studying, and seeing me walk in, she asked if I needed something without even lifting her head from her books. I sat casually on the edge of her bed, crossing my legs in a relaxed manner, and asked when she was heading back to school. She replied that she was leaving tomorrow. I was shocked by how soon that was. After the initial surprise wore off, I mumbled, asking if there was any way she could stay for just a couple more days. She shook her head and gave a definitive no. Even though I had fully expected that answer, I still slumped over, completely drained of all energy. Noticing my silence, she turned around, pulled a small box out of her backpack, and handed it to me while wishing me a happy birthday. I froze completely because she rarely ever gave me gifts. She told me to wait until I went back to my own room to open it. Hearing her voice finally snapped me out of my daze, and I blankly muttered a thank you. She then caught sight of the little bear clutched in my arms and casually asked who had given it to me. I was affectionately rubbing the bear's head as I answered that it was from Mr. Dalton next door, brought back from his business trip. To my absolute shock, the moment Ava heard those words, her expression darkened instantly. Without a second thought, she snatched the bear right out of my hands, shoved the window open, and hurled it outside. We lived on the first floor, so just outside the window was the neighborhood's landscaping belt. Although I could easily go out and retrieve it, it was guaranteed to be dirty by now. Having just accepted a gift from her, I felt awkward about completely losing my temper, so I just frowned heavily and demanded to know why she had thrown my bear away. She took her time closing the window and strictly forbade me from going to pick it up. Ignoring her command, I took the gift box back to my room and then marched out the front door all by myself. Ava followed closely right on my heels. The little bear had landed in the bushes right outside her window. Just as I was about to step into the dirt to grab it, she grabbed me tightly by the arm, reiterating that she had explicitly told me not to pick it up. I struggled with all my might, my voice involuntarily raising in volume as I yelled at her to let me go, demanding to know what right she had to do this since it was my birthday present. Perhaps my stubborn anger gave me a surge of unnatural strength, or perhaps Ava was holding back out of fear of hurting me, but miraculously, I managed to break free from her grip. However, Ava beat me to the punch, sprinting into the bushes and snatching the little bear up first. I blocked her path and demanded she hand it over. In the very next second, Ava ripped the little bear into absolute shreds. She held up the mangled remains of the plushie and challenged me, asking if I still wanted it looking like that. I stood there stunned for only a fraction of a second before the anger took over. I stomped my feet furiously, demanding to know what she was doing and ordering her to pay me back for my little bear. By this time, our parents had rushed over. Looking at the standoff between the two of us, our mother couldn't help but ask what on earth was going on, noting that it was my bear. Ava didn't utter a single syllable in response. Carrying the completely shredded remains of the little bear, she bypassed the three of us, walked straight over to the trash can, and threw it away without a moment's hesitation. It was my actual birthday, yet she was acting entirely unreasonable. All my pent-up grievances exploded in an instant. Crying hysterically, I charged at her, shoving her forcefully as I screamed that I hated her. The intense emotions of an elementary schooler shifted that rapidly. Just moments ago when she handed me the gift, I was deeply moved. Now she had instantly reverted back to being the cold, unfeeling older sister I had always known. Our parents always preferred addressing issues directly, so that very night, they held a family meeting in the living room specifically for the two of us. Ava and I sat on opposite ends of the sofa, fully engaged in a bitter cold war. Our mother asked her directly why she had thrown away my little bear. Ava kept her expression completely apathetic, stating flatly that she just didn't like the bear. Hearing this reignited my fury entirely. I shot to my feet, pointed right at her, and yelled for my mom to look at her attitude. But the damage was already done. The little bear was in pieces inside the trash can. Our parents interrogated her for a long time but couldn't get a proper explanation out of her. Ultimately, they had no choice but to give her a verbal reprimand and order her to buy me a brand new one with her own money once she grew up and started working. As for me, I stormed back to my bedroom in a blind rage, rolling around on my bed and screaming at the top of my lungs. I threw a wild tantrum for quite a while before I finally managed to calm down. Catching sight of the gift box sitting on my desk, I walked over and tore it open. Resting inside was an old-fashioned film camera. My hobbies during childhood always came and went in brief, intense phases, but my one enduring passion was taking pictures. My parents' phones were stuffed to the brim with my elementary school selfies because they strictly insisted I wouldn't get a phone of my own until middle school. When Ava finally got her own phone, I was practically dying of jealousy. I would constantly stare at her with pitiful, longing eyes, begging to borrow it just to play around for a bit. She usually rejected me with a blunt dream on. I had absolutely never imagined that she actually kept track of my hobbies, nor did I ever expect her to gift me a camera. Thinking back on it carefully as an adult, I have no idea how long she had to painstakingly save her allowance just to afford it. Regardless, in that specific moment, the incident where she threw my little bear away completely vanished from my mind. The following morning, as Ava was preparing to head back to school, I clung to her, whining and begging until she finally agreed to take a picture with me at the entrance of our neighborhood. She only agreed to the photo in exchange for one strict condition. She demanded that from then on, I was absolutely never to have any contact whatsoever with anyone from the Dalton family. I agreed to her term without a second of hesitation. Barely 2 years later, the Dalton family packed up and moved away entirely. When we returned home that day, the sanitation worker was clearing out the garbage from the previous night. I noticed a small square black object fall right out of the mangled bear's body. I assumed it was probably just one of the bear's plastic eyes. After starting high school, Ava lived on campus and only came home occasionally on weekends. Our parents often remarked that Ava had been fiercely independent since she was a little girl, fundamentally different from me in every way. My mother actually didn't quit her job until right after I was born. Before that, Ava had been living full-time in another city with Grandma, even attending kindergarten out there. It was only after I was born that Ava and Grandma finally moved in with our parents. Grandma stayed with us until I was 3 years old before moving back to her own hometown, officially marking the start of our life as a family of 4. I heard that Ava started walking to and from elementary school all by herself, and eventually figured out how to ride the public bus entirely on her own. Meanwhile, when I started middle school, our parents were still taking turns dropping me off and picking me up every single day. By that time, Ava had already been accepted into a prestigious out-of-state university and moved away to study entirely on her own. Our parents frequently said that there was absolutely no child more worry-free than Ava. During my 8th grade year, Grandma passed away from an illness. Ava cried for a very, very long time, her eyes swelling up heavily. She squatted in front of Grandma's tombstone, whispering secrets to her in a low, trembling voice. My heart was heavily burdened with sorrow as well. Just as I stepped forward, hoping to offer Ava some comfort, my mother pulled me back, gently telling me to let Ava have some proper time to talk to Grandma. After handling all of Grandma's funeral arrangements, life simply had to march on. The year I started high school, I received a package in the mail from Ava. Inside was a brown teddy bear accompanied by a simple postcard. The little bear looked incredibly similar to the one she had violently thrown away back when I was in the 6th grade. The message scrawled on the postcard read, "Wishing Nora all the best in high school." I hugged the little bear tight, snapped a quick photo, and texted it to her with a message saying, "Nora has received it." It didn't take long for her to send a one-word reply back, "Good." I remember thinking to myself just how utterly cold and detached she was. My academic performance was never anywhere near as stellar as Ava's, but my parents always reassured me that as long as I tried my absolute best, it was completely fine. The 3 years of high school vanished in the blink of an eye, and I managed to get accepted into an ordinary state university right in our own city to study accounting. Ava's application for graduate school was rejected, so she was currently living at home, intensely preparing to take the entrance exams for a second attempt. Right after freshman orientation week wrapped up, I was completely fascinated and enchanted by every single aspect of college life. My parents mentioned that Ava was practically rotting away in her bedroom studying all day long without ever stepping foot outside, so they urged me to drag her out for a walk whenever I had some free time. Taking their advice, I called her on the phone, telling her to come over so I could give her a grand tour of my new campus. She retorted by asking what could possibly be worth touring at my school, bluntly stating that coming over would only drag down her studying progress. I was completely speechless. I mentally cursed the entire obnoxious breed of straight-A students. Refusing to give up, I pressed on, arguing that studying required a healthy balance of tension and relaxation. I begged her to come out and unwind, promising to treat her to a meal on me. She immediately shot back, telling me to save my pathetic little allowance for myself, firmly declaring she wasn't going. I dug my heels in and refused to back down, whining for her to come. I reminded her that she had never even visited my school once, while I had trekked all the way out to her campus, which was infinitely further away. I threatened that if she didn't come to me, I was going to march all the way back home just to forcefully drag her out. Right after that, I distinctly heard the sharp sound of a pen being slammed down, followed immediately by Ava's deeply annoyed voice telling me to stay exactly where I was and wait. A massive smile instantly broke out across my face as I cheerfully replied that I would wait right there. While waiting for Ava to arrive, I dug that old-fashioned film camera out of my dorm room, fully intending to drag her all over campus to take a massive pile of commemorative photos. However, reality quickly proved that no matter how flawlessly I planned things, it was nothing but wishful thinking. By the time Ava finally showed up at my school, it was already 4 in the afternoon. She allowed me to take exactly one single photo at the main campus gate before immediately declaring it was time to eat. It was only through my relentless, shameless nagging that I managed to delay her dinner plans by roughly an hour, which thankfully resulted in me scoring a few extra photos of us together. Just outside the campus was a bustling little street packed with snack stalls and restaurants, a popular hangout where tons of students gathered to eat and socialize. I first dragged Ava over to a beverage stand down on the street level, buying 2 cups of lemonade before turning to ask what she wanted to eat. She scanned the surrounding options thoroughly before finally pointing her chin toward a grilled fish joint situated on the 2nd floor. I agreed enthusiastically, mentioning that it worked out perfectly since I hadn't tried that place yet either. As we headed upstairs, Ava pointed at the deep cracks snaking along the walls, commenting that the building seemed rather dilapidated. I nodded in agreement, explaining that it probably was quite old. I told her I'd heard this street had been developed a long time ago, and that the building actually extended 2 more floors up, housing a small motel and a few rental storefronts. Because it was only 5 o'clock, the restaurant was still relatively empty. The only other patrons were a couple on a date and a table full of students celebrating a birthday. After Ava and I finished ordering our food, we sat opposite each other in a booth pressed against the wall, trapped in complete silence. The atmosphere was undeniably awkward. I called out her name, Ava. Biting down softly on my straw, I was just about to strike up a random conversation in desperate hopes of shattering the suffocating silence between us. Suddenly, dust and debris began showering down from the restaurant ceiling, followed instantly by a deafening, violent roar. Before my brain could even register what was happening, Ava yanked me violently underneath the table. In a fraction of a second, my entire world was swallowed by pitch-black darkness as the sky collapsed and the earth shattered beneath us. Ava shielded my head with her life, wrapping her arms tightly around me as we curled up desperately on the shaking floor. I felt as though I had been trapped inside a bizarre dream. When I finally regained consciousness, I was lying in a hospital bed, my parents hovering anxiously beside me, their faces etched with pure terror. I had completely lost all memory of what actually transpired during the building collapse. The only fragments I could recall were the building caving in, Ava holding me tight, and then absolute, suffocating darkness. Right, Ava. I frantically whipped my head around to scan the room. Thank God, she was standing right behind my parents. She was still wearing the exact same clothes from the day she came to visit me, looking completely unharmed without a single scratch on her. My mother cried out my name, expressing immense relief that I had finally woken up. She gripped my hand tightly, the rims of her eyes were stark red, a clear sign she had been crying heavily. I quickly tried to comfort her, assuring her that I was perfectly fine. I boasted that Ava and I were tough to kill and that we were both doing absolutely great. I then looked past my mother and shot a knowing glance at Ava, asking her to back me up. The moment those words left my mouth, the color instantly drained from the faces of everyone in the room. But I remained completely oblivious to their shifting expressions. All I noticed was Ava smiling gently and nodding back at me, agreeing that yes, their Nora was incredibly tough and resilient. Nora. She had always addressed me strictly by my full name, which usually made her sound like she was furious with me. It seemed that surviving a life-or-death situation together had genuinely softened her attitude toward me. Strangely enough, my mother sat right in front of me, her tears falling in an unstoppable stream. My father, his face extremely solemn, stepped out of the room to have a private word with the doctor. I sat up and threw my arms around my mother, begging her to stop crying. Ava stood directly behind her, gently patting her back, echoing my words and telling our mother not to cry anymore. The doctor soon returned to perform a few basic examinations on me, asking gently if I could remember anything about what had happened during the incident. I strained my brain trying to recall the details, but my mind was filled with nothing but an impenetrable void of darkness. Suddenly, a blinding, uncontrollable pain shot through my head. I clutched my head in agony, crying out that I didn't remember anything, telling the doctor to go ask Ava instead. Neither the doctor nor my parents said another word. My mother collapsed against my father's chest, sobbing uncontrollably until she couldn't breathe. Ava was the only one who stepped forward to wrap me in a hug, softly whispering that if I couldn't remember, I shouldn't force it, urging me to just focus on resting. She had absolutely never hugged me before in her entire life. Her embrace felt icy cold, fleeting like a passing breeze, yet it filled me with a profound, overwhelming sense of security. Comforted, I lay back down and drifted off into a deep sleep. When I woke up again, the doctor informed me that I was clear to be discharged. Aside from suffering from low blood sugar, I only had a few minor scrapes and bruises on my legs. My parents insisted I take a full year-long leave of absence from university, telling me to stay home and focus entirely on resting and recovering until I was fully ready to return. Personally, I felt like there was nothing fundamentally wrong with me. Because my memories of the event were so blurry, I figured that as long as I couldn't recall the trauma, the accident couldn't have caused that much psychological damage. However, Ava firmly urged me to listen to our parents. I rationalized that since Ava was already stuck at home studying for her exams anyway, staying home with her wouldn't be so bad. My mother must have been severely traumatized by the incident. During this period, she came into my room to sleep in my bed every single night. I would wrap my arms around her just like I did when I was a little kid, and we would chat deep into the night. I asked my mom if she used to hold Ava like this when they slept together back when Ava was little. My mother's voice grew thick and muffled as she explained that Ava was raised entirely by grandma during her early years, and that they only ever had the chance to visit her during major holidays. She confessed, her voice breaking, that she never actually had the chance. I was completely bewildered, asking how she could possibly not have had the chance. I pointed out that whenever they went back to visit, they easily could have just slept in the same bed. She shook her head sadly, explaining that Ava found her practically like a stranger. She recalled that the year Ava finally learned how to talk, when she and my father went to Grandma's house to visit, Ava actually called her older sister. As she spoke, she choked back a sob, whispering that she should have brought Ava back to live with them much, much sooner. I gently wiped the tears off her face, speaking softly to reassure her. I promised that Ava definitely wouldn't hold any grudges against them for that. I added that she would have plenty of opportunities in the future to share a bed with Ava and finally make up for all those lost childhood regrets. She didn't respond to that, she simply tucked the blankets tightly around me and murmured that it was getting late, urging me to go to sleep. In the middle of the night, while hovering in that hazy space between dreams and reality, I was almost certain I heard my mother crying silently in the dark. During this recovery period, An overwhelming number of friends sent me messages to check in and see how I was doing. College friends, former classmates from middle and high school, and even elementary school friends I hadn't spoken to in ages all reached out. Staring at the screen entirely flooded with red notification dots, I was deeply moved, overcome with the profound gratitude of having narrowly survived a disaster. As I frantically typed out replies to assure everyone I was safe, I turned to Ava and remarked just how wonderful it felt to simply be alive. She merely smiled and nodded in agreement. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with my mother lately. She constantly kept forgetting to set out a bowl and chopsticks for Ava at the dinner table. But it didn't matter at all, because I would absolutely never forget. Ava would smile radiantly at me and softly thank me. She had truly changed so drastically. In the past, she would have never been caught dead thanking me like that. I actually felt completely weirded out by how affectionate she was acting, squirming uncomfortably as I told her to stop saying it because it felt way too awkward. She just laughed again, confessing that she had actually always wanted to say thank you to me. When I asked her what on earth she was thanking me for, she fell completely silent again. Today, my parents were dressed entirely in black. They mentioned they needed to head out to take care of some important business, strictly ordering me to stay inside and be good, and warning me not to go running around anywhere. Standing by the front door to see them off, I assured them they didn't need to worry, promising I would listen to whatever Ava told me to do. The rims of my mother's eyes instantly turned completely red once again. Ava was sitting quietly, reviewing her study materials for her exams as usual. Not wanting to disturb her focus, I popped the memory card out of my old film camera and loaded it into my laptop, deciding to finally organize the batch of photos I had taken recently. I had kept the camera strapped securely around my neck that entire day. Perhaps that was exactly why it had managed to survive the collapse completely intact. The very last photo on the memory card captured me desperately puffing out my cheeks and leaning in to kiss Ava, only for her to mercilessly shove my face away. Ava's expression in the picture looked totally disgusted, yet if you looked closely, her eyes were unmistakably shining with laughter. I absolutely loved that particular photo, so I immediately scooped up my laptop and rushed over to show it to her. I pointed at the screen, teasing her about how visibly disgusted she looked by me. She stared intensely at the two figures frozen in the picture, her voice laced with deep regret as she whispered that she really should have taken more photos with me. I waved my hand dismissively, not caring in the slightest, assuring her it wasn't a big deal because we would have a lifetime of opportunities to take more later. When my parents finally returned home, they were practically radiating utter exhaustion and profound sorrow. I eagerly brought the laptop over to show them the photo, but my mother instantly slapped her hand over her mouth, bursting into tears as she fled straight into her bedroom. My father's shoulders slumped entirely. It seemed as though something massive was physically blocking his throat, rendering him completely unable to speak a single word. Finally, he just reached out and patted me gently on the head, solemnly telling me to make sure I saved that picture carefully. After that, he turned and followed my mother into their room. I stood frozen in the center of the living room, completely at a loss for what to do. What on earth was wrong with them? Ava, who had been watching the entire scene unfold from the sidelines, quietly spoke up, assuring me that their reaction had nothing to do with me and telling me not to worry about it. But later that night, a vicious argument broke out between them. Hiding just outside their bedroom door, I eavesdropped in secret, quickly realizing that they were, in fact, absolutely fighting about me. My mother was sobbing, crying out that if I were to find out the truth, I wouldn't be able to handle it and would only suffer a more complete mental breakdown. My father's stance, however, was violently resolute. He shot back that even if that were true, they had to make me realize the reality of the situation. He strictly forbade her from letting me continue living in this completely delusional state, emphatically stating that this was a serious sickness. My mother just kept crying helplessly. Eventually, my father's tone softened slightly, and he added that Ava absolutely wouldn't want her younger sister living like this either. I sprinted back into Ava's room and frantically asked her if I was sick. I argued desperately that all I did was fail to remember the specific details of what happened during the accident, and that surely couldn't mean I was sick. Ava remained seated at her desk. She reached out to gently stroke my hair, softly suggesting that it was likely just some lingering trauma from the accident. She urged me to listen to our parents and focus entirely on receiving treatment so I could get better. Focus on receiving treatment. Since those were Ava's direct orders, I resigned myself to obeying them without further question. My parents took me to see a psychological counselor, a remarkably gentle and soft-spoken woman. She engaged me in long, deep conversations, the vast majority of which centered entirely around Ava. I spilled absolutely everything to her, recounting every single tyrannical and bossy thing Ava had ever done to me since we were little. She asked me gently if, despite all of that, I still loved Ava very much. I nodded my head vigorously, stating firmly that of course I did. I explained that I knew Ava loved me deeply too, even though she completely refused to ever say it out loud. I could always feel it. She then asked me how Ava had been doing recently. I casually replied that she was doing great, noting that she had even become significantly more gentle and affectionate lately. Later on, the counselor prescribed a regimen of medication for me, instructing my parents to make sure I took my pills strictly on schedule. In reality, I didn't need their supervision at all, because Ava would always remember to remind me when it was time. My parents deliberately threw away all the original prescription bottles, meticulously sorting the pills into unmarked daily organizers so I wouldn't be able to read what kind of medication I was actually taking. I never bothered to ask them about it anyway. I simply trusted that no matter what, they would absolutely never do anything to harm me. They also started taking me out for random strolls to help me relax and clear my head. During these walks, Ava would always trail closely behind us at a leisurely, unhurried pace. A month later, my phone was absolutely bombarded with breaking news reports regarding the building collapse on the street behind my university. The official casualty count had finally been fully tallied and released to the public. 9 people had been injured, and 22 people were dead. The official list of victims' names was plastered everywhere. The couple who had been out on a date that afternoon, along with a group of joyous students loudly celebrating a birthday, had all perished tragically in the disaster. My parents had completely forbidden me from looking at any news coverage or articles related to the incident, insisting that it would severely hinder my recovery process. Their only goal was to keep the brutal truth hidden from me for as long as possible, desperately hoping that I would slowly wake up to reality on my own. But in an era dominated by instantaneous digital information, how could a tragedy of this magnitude possibly remain a secret? The fact that they had managed to keep me entirely in the dark for this long was already an absolute miracle. Shortly after the official death toll was published, a fresh wave of friends began flooding my phone with messages trying to comfort me. "Nora, how are you holding up? My deepest condolences." "Nora, I honestly don't even know how to begin comforting you right now. I feel like any words of comfort I offer are just completely hollow and powerless, but please promise me you'll rest well. Everything will eventually pass. Nora, sending you the biggest hug. Your sister is going to become a star up in the sky to watch over and protect you." Every single one of these messages screamed one undeniable, horrifying truth. My older sister was already dead. But how could that be possible? Ava. I violently shoved my bedroom door open and screamed her name into the hallway. Ava's bedroom. The living room. The dining room. The bathroom. There was absolutely no one anywhere. I began muttering frantically to myself, completely unhinged. She had literally just gone for a walk with me yesterday. How could she possibly be dead? Mom. I charged wildly into my mother's bedroom, my voice instantly cracking into a raw, gravelly rasp as I desperately demanded to know where Ava was. My mother had been casually drying her wet hair with a towel. The moment my words hit her ears, her hands froze completely out of her control. She asked, her voice trembling, if I had remembered everything. Remembered what? I demanded. The very instant those words left my mouth, a violent, chaotic torrent of memories smashed directly into my brain: the collapsing building. The deafening, world-ending roar. The sky entirely obliterated by choking dust. Ava refusing to let go, shielding me with her own body. Ava, drenched entirely in blood. I remembered everything. On the day the building caved in, Ava and I were instantly crushed beneath the massive pile of rubble. The world in front of me went completely pitch black, and every breath I took was saturated with the vile taste of pulverized dust. Originally, Ava had simply been covering my head with her hands. But as the floor plummeted downwards, we both completely lost our balance and crashed hard against the ground. In a split second, Ava violently twisted her body around, throwing herself entirely over me to use her back as a human shield. I heard her let out several agonizing, muffled groans of sheer pain. Once the violent shaking finally stopped and everything fell entirely still, I lay completely paralyzed on the ground, absolutely terrified to move even a single muscle. The sound of Ava's ragged breathing was crystal clear right behind my ear. My voice was utterly saturated with tears as I whimpered, begging to know if she was okay. Her voice sounded incredibly heavy and muffled as she swore she was fine, desperately urging me not to be afraid. The pocket of survival space trapping us was horrifyingly small. We had absolutely zero room to move. My tears began falling completely out of my control as I sobbed, asking Ava if she could move at all. Her voice was barely a whisper now as she confessed that she was completely pinned. Half of her body was crushed underneath the debris, and she warned that if she tried to shift her weight, it could trigger a secondary collapse. She firmly ordered me to stay perfectly still, be good, conserve my energy, and just wait for the rescue teams to find us. I couldn't see anything regarding Ava's physical condition in the absolute darkness, but I could vividly feel a thick, hot liquid streaming relentlessly down the back of my neck. Completely consumed by panic, I frantically fumbled around until I managed to drag my phone out of my pocket. The moment the harsh beam of the flashlight flickered on, the ground beneath us was entirely covered in a horrifying, traumatizing pool of dark crimson. I broke down instantly, sobbing uncontrollably as I screamed that she was bleeding, that she was losing so much blood. She weakly raised her hand to pat my arm softly, telling me not to be scared and swearing again that she was completely fine. She suddenly recalled that right when the building started falling, I was holding my cup of lemonade, and she urgently asked me if I still had it. I had been gripping that plastic cup in a death grip the entire time. More than half of it had violently splashed out, but there was still roughly a third of the liquid left at the bottom. My face completely soaked in tears, I nodded my head frantically, sobbing that I still had it. Her voice grew even fainter as she strictly ordered me to remember exactly what she was about to say. She instructed that whenever I heard noises coming from outside the rubble, I was to grab a rock and smash it violently against the ground so the rescuers could hear me. She noted that I probably didn't have much water left, heavily emphasizing that I needed to ration it strictly and drink it as slowly as humanly possible. She warned me that if my phone still had battery, I was absolutely not to waste it. I was only to turn it on to check the time, ensuring that I forced myself to rest properly on a set schedule so I wouldn't burn through my energy. Then, she admitted that she probably wasn't going to make it. She desperately begged me not to let my emotions spiral out of control, insisting that I had to keep my breathing perfectly steady. As she spoke, she let out another sharp, agonizing groan before forcing herself to continue. She whispered over and over that everything was going to be fine, telling me there was no reason to be afraid because Ava was right here with me. Ava is right here with you. I could feel Ava's body, pressed entirely against mine, growing colder and colder by the second, her breathing becoming horrifyingly weak. I suffered a total mental collapse, crying so violently I lost the ability to form proper words, just screaming at her to please not die, begging her not to leave me. She forced her mouth open one last time, her voice impossibly frail, confessing that she had actually always liked me very much, even though she had never once said it out loud. She whispered that she was incredibly grateful to our parents, and that being my older sister had brought her profound happiness. But, she explained, because she had grown up having to be fiercely independent her entire life, she honestly just never learned how to be close to me. She admitted that she was often unbearably cold to me, and guessed that I probably hated her for it. I shook my head violently, sobbing through my whimpers that I didn't hate her at all, that Ava was my favorite person in the entire world. A faint, ghostly smile touched her lips as she whispered that she was glad to hear that. She told me she had once promised Grandma that she would always take good care of me. Therefore, she ordered me strictly never to feel any guilt over what was happening, demanding that I absolutely had to survive. She confessed that there were still so many things in this world she had wanted to see, so it was entirely up to me to live on and see the rest of the world for her. Only then, she breathed, can I finally rest in peace. After uttering those final words, Ava fell utterly, permanently silent. Ava. Ava. Completely unable to hold it in a second longer, I collapsed against the dirt and screamed her name until my vocal cords tore. But no matter how violently I screamed, she never gave me a single response ever again. I bit down viciously on the knuckles of my fingers, my entire existence whittled down to one solitary, burning conviction: survive. Survive. Ava had ordered me to survive. She had prioritized my life over her own during her absolute final moments on Earth. I had no choice but to survive. So, I obeyed her final commands perfectly. Whenever mealtime rolled around, I allowed myself exactly 2 tiny sips of lemonade. When night fell, I squeezed my eyes shut and forced my body to rest. Eventually, when the starvation became absolute physical torture, I dug the lemon slices out of the cup and devoured them entirely, swallowing both the bitter rind and the flesh. At exactly the 60th hour, I finally heard distinct noises coming from outside the rubble. I immediately grabbed a rock and began violently smashing it against the ground, over and over again. I screamed at the top of my lungs that there was still someone alive down here, begging them to hurry. Immediately after, a chaotic explosion of frantic voices erupted above me. Ava's body was dragged out of the ruins before mine. I squinted through the blinding light to look at her. Her entire body was nothing but mangled flesh and blood, without a single patch of intact skin left anywhere on her. I squeezed my eyes shut, entirely unable to endure the unbearable horror of the sight. My tears refused to stop falling. I cried until my entire body went into violent convulsions, my hands and feet went completely numb, and I finally passed out completely. My mother rushed over to me, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders, wrapping me in a desperate hug as she sobbed. She cried out that Ava was already gone, and that she absolutely could not afford to let anything happen to me too, begging me to understand. I slumped against the floor on my knees, my head hanging lifelessly in defeat. "Mom," I rasped out, "why didn't you just let me stay sick?" If I had just stayed sick, Ava could have stayed right here with me forever. I could still see her. I could still talk to her. I could still reach out and touch her. Instead of living this agonizing reality, left with absolutely nothing but hollow memories. That night, I slept entirely in Ava's bed. Burrowed deep inside Ava's blankets, I felt like I could still smell her lingering scent. I lay on my side, staring blankly at the desk situated right in front of the window. Ava used to sit right there and study every single day. Yet now, a visible layer of dust had settled completely over its surface. How on earth had I been so blind that I hadn't noticed? Sliding my hand blindly underneath her pillow, my fingers brushed against a hard object. I pulled it out and realized it was a thick photo album. I peeled open the first page. It was a picture of me just moments after I was born. Scrawled on the back of the photograph was the sentence, "I finally have a little sister." The second page held a photo of me on my first birthday. Written on the back was, "My little sister is gnawing on her toes, so cute." The third page featured me taking a bubble bath. The back read, "My little sister getting all clean and fragrant." Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Every single picture in the album was of me. She had even meticulously saved and perfectly preserved all those horrific, embarrassing photos from my elementary school days that were buried in our parents' phones. There was also a handful of photos of Ava and me together. I found the exact photo I had begged her to take with me at the neighborhood gate the morning after my 12th birthday. Stuck to the back of this specific photo was a small sticky note. I threw Nora's bear away because when I was in 5th grade, Mr. Dalton tried to touch my private parts. I fought him off and refused him. He is absolutely not a good man, and I absolutely refuse to let him set his sights on Nora. I really hope she doesn't hate me for this. As soon as I start making my own money, I swear I'll buy her a brand new one. She had buried this horrifying secret entirely on her own. She had never once breathed a single word of it to me or our parents. I violently wiped the fresh tears off my face and forced myself to keep flipping through the pages. Inside, I found the selfie I had texted her right after receiving the teddy bear she mailed me for high school. Beside it she had written, "Nora, go crush high school." The most recent photo in the album was the picture of me taken during my college freshman orientation week. I was completely tanned, looking incredibly dark. On the back, Ava had teased, dying of laughter, Nora tanned herself into a little charcoal briquette. Tucked securely at the very end of the album were 2 loose sheets of paper. Staring at the unmistakably familiar handwriting, I completely lost my battle for control, collapsing onto the mattress and wailing hysterically as a torrent of tears flooded my face. It was the very same essay I had written back in the 3rd grade. Written boldly across the top of both pages was the title, "My Older Sister." Not only had Ava preserved it in absolutely perfect condition, but she had also left a final handwritten message on the back. "I hope Nora lives a life of absolute peace, smooth sailing and safety." I had been fiercely and deeply loved by Ava my entire life without ever realizing it. She had just loved me entirely in her own unique way. The following day, my parents accompanied me to the cemetery to visit Ava. I gently placed a fresh bouquet of flowers down in front of her tombstone. Ava looked incredibly beautiful. The bright sunlight cascaded directly onto her photograph, illuminating her brilliant, radiant smile. I squatted down, softly tracing the letters of her name carved into the stone with my fingertip. If I tell you how much I miss you, will you promise to visit me in my dreams often? I whispered. Right at that exact moment, a sudden gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, softly brushing against my hair. I sat frozen in shock for a brief second before my eyes flooded with tears once again, a small genuine smile curving my lips as I whispered back, "Then I'll take that as a yes." Some time later, I returned to the hospital for a follow-up examination and finally learned the truth. I had actually been suffering from severe schizophrenia brought on by the trauma, which was exactly why I had been experiencing vivid auditory and visual hallucinations. Medically speaking, there was absolutely no reason I should have recovered as rapidly as I did. But perhaps it was simply because Ava couldn't bear to see me suffering like that anymore, so she quietly decided to take her leave. One of Ava's closest friends came to the cemetery to pay her respects. She pulled me aside and confessed, Ava actually had someone she really liked. Her original plan was to finally confess her feelings to him the moment she passed her entrance exams. It's just such a tragedy. I immediately asked her for the guy's contact information. During the year I took off from school, I traveled all the way out to the university Ava had desperately wanted to attend, personally relaying the heartfelt confession she never got the chance to speak to the boy she loved. He was absolutely devastated upon hearing the news, and immediately booked a flight out specifically to bring Ava a massive bouquet of flowers. I truly believe that Ava has no lingering regrets left behind anymore. After returning to university, I threw myself entirely into my studies, working fiercely while also making sure to properly enjoy everything college life had to offer. During my absolute final year of undergrad, I registered to take the graduate school entrance exam for the exact same university Ava had fought so hard to attend. I don't think I had even worked a fraction this hard studying for my high school final exams. I finished the interview. Everything went incredibly smoothly. Ava, I promise I will thoroughly explore this beautiful world entirely for the both of us. My name is Ava Merritt. I lived with Grandma for the earliest years of my life. When I was 5 years old, Grandma told me that my mother was about to give birth to a little sister, so I was finally moved from Grandma's house to go live with my parents. On the day my younger sister was born, my mother was in an agonizing amount of pain. Even though I wasn't particularly close to either of my parents, I was still terrified of anything bad happening to them. I was completely consumed by fear that day, absolutely terrified that I was going to lose my mother forever. If that was the cost, I preferred to completely reject the idea of having a sister. Fortunately, both of them made it through the ordeal perfectly safe. I clearly remember my mother gently pulling me into her arms right after the birth, guiding me to look at my newborn sister. She softly placed the baby's tiny hand entirely inside my own, speaking in an incredibly gentle voice as she told me that from now on, I would always have a little sister to keep me company. My sister was so incredibly tiny, a soft, wrinkled, bizarre-looking little thing, looking unimaginably fragile. Grandma stood nearby, proudly declaring that since I was officially a big sister now, it was my absolute duty to protect her. I immediately pouted my lips in defiance, retorting that I was still just a little kid myself, so how was I possibly supposed to protect her? Yet, later on, when my parents asked me what kind of extracurricular activities I wanted to sign up for, I chose Taekwondo without a single second of hesitation. Once Nora actually learned how to walk and talk, she proved to be an absolute menace. I flatly refused to coddle her. If she threw my things, she got a beating. If she ripped my books, she got a beating. If she tried to snatch my toys, she got a beating. My parents were honestly great. They absolutely never showed any blind favoritism towards her. They constantly reassured me that if she deserved to be hit, I should hit her, warning me not to let her develop into a spoiled brat. There were genuinely moments where I was deeply thankful for Nora. If she hadn't been born, my mother probably never would have quit her job, and I likely would have been stuck living out with Grandma for several more years before I finally got to live with my parents. Yet, there were also times when I was profoundly jealous of her. She could act shamelessly spoiled with our parents, throw massive tantrums, roll around on the floor, and blurt out whatever came to her mind without fear. But an invisible, indescribable barrier of polite distance always lingered between my parents and me. Perhaps it was simply because I hadn't been raised directly by their side during my most formative years. Still, I never once blamed them for it, knowing full well they were out working themselves to the bone just to provide for me. After Nora was born, Grandma stayed with us for 3 years before deciding she couldn't handle city life anymore and moved back. By that point, I was already well into elementary school. My dad was busy working full-time, while my mom had to wake up exhaustingly early every single day just to drop me off at school, only to rush straight back home to take care of Nora. During my third grade year, after noticing that several of my classmates walked to and from school entirely by themselves, I voluntarily approached my parents and told them my mom didn't need to drive me anymore, confidently declaring I could handle the commute completely on my own. Both my parents praised me endlessly for being so mature and sensible. I completely agreed with them. Nora was genuinely, incredibly cute. She was slightly terrified of me, yet always felt this completely irresistible urge to try and get close to me. Whenever I fell sick, she would sneak silently into my room, pressing her warm tiny little hands firmly against my forehead to check my fever. She would awkwardly drag a small stool over to the counter to boil water for me, then sneak the hot cup onto my nightstand. When I was deeply focused on my homework, she desperately wanted to play with me but was absolutely terrified of disturbing my focus. So she would just plop down on the hard floor right outside my bedroom door, quietly playing make-believe with her Barbie dolls all by herself, remaining perfectly silent and well-behaved without making a single sound. Eventually, I specifically bought a soft rug and placed it right outside my doorway because I was worried she would catch a cold sitting on the bare floor. The most explosive tantrum Nora ever threw at me during our entire childhood was undoubtedly over that stupid teddy bear. The moment I heard she had received that bear specifically from Mr. Dalton, I chucked it straight out the window without a fraction of a second's hesitation. Back when I was in 5th grade, Mr. Dalton spotted me waiting for the bus near my school and offered to give me a ride home. Knowing he was our neighbor, I blindly trusted him and got in his car. But as we were pulling into our neighborhood, he suddenly revealed his true disgusting nature, trying to touch me inappropriately and trying to bribe me by promising he would take me to the supermarket right after and buy me absolutely anything I wanted. I was utterly terrified in that moment, but I forced myself to maintain a calm facade, stating firmly that he wasn't allowed to do that and threatening to tell my parents immediately. Perhaps he realized I was too calm and collected to be easily manipulated, so he instantly backed off, awkwardly laughing it off by claiming he was just playing a silly joke on me and telling me not to take it seriously. I ultimately chose to bury the incident and never told my parents. They were already so incredibly exhausted from work, and I was terrified of causing them any extra trouble. However, there was absolutely no way in hell I was going to let Nora keep that disgusting man's bear. The absolute worst-case scenario was that I would just have to save up my own money to buy her a replacement later. I started secretly compiling Nora's photo album when I entered middle school. I meticulously left specific notes on the back of every single photo of her, perfectly documenting every step of her childhood. I even hid those 2 pages of homework I had brutally ripped up securely inside the album's pages. I knew she loved photography, so I hoarded my allowance for more than half a year specifically to buy her that old-fashioned film camera. Right before she took her college entrance exams, I used money I earned entirely myself to buy her a brand new Polaroid camera. In reality, the amount of gifts I actually gave her was pathetically small, completely unlike her, who would rack her brain every single year trying to figure out the perfect gift to give me for my birthday. I firmly believe that I loved her with all my heart. But the love she gave me in return was absolutely just as massive. When the building started collapsing above us, throwing myself over Nora to shield her was a completely subconscious reflex. My only thought was that I had to protect her, and absolutely nothing else. It's just that my injuries were far too catastrophic. My entire body was numb from the agonizing pain, robbing me of the chance to personally witness her being pulled out of the rubble alive. That is genuinely my one and only regret. My precious Nora, you absolutely must live a life of perfect peace and safety.